status to try to get in today's launch attempt just around 27 minutes from now.
And one thing I do want to mention, I misspoke. It's not the South Padre Amphitheater, it's the Cameron County Amphitheater.
Now, the entire Starship structure on your screen is made from stainless steel. When it's stacked, it stands about 120 meters tall. It's about 9 meters around. And we have this awesome video that shows you just how big that is. You can see one of our technicians there doing some final prep work in advance of today's test. And man, there's the 120-meter monster.
The person just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Now, just like Falcon 9, Starship has 2 stages, which we'll talk more about those in a minute. In addition to those 2 stages, Starship actually has a 3rd stage, which we call Stage 0. It consists of all the launch pad infrastructure built around the rocket, as you can see there on your screen, and it's truly an engineering feat in its own right.
Yeah, we've got a great shot there of the various different components of it. The pad, the infrastructure, all that is required to get into filling the tanks. Now, let's talk about the Super Heavy. Its name says everything. It's super, it's heavy, it's super heavy. When it's operational, it'll be responsible for providing the power to escape that mighty gravitational pull of Earth that we've got here and take Starship into orbit.
The booster itself stands about 70 meters tall and is roughly the same height as a fully integrated Falcon 9, which is just so crazy to me. But this super heavy booster has a diameter roughly 2.5 times that of Falcon 9, and with 33 much larger engines. We have a beautiful view here. This is one of my favorite views that we're going to get today. Those are our 33 Raptor engines at the base of the super heavy booster.
Yep, and you can see they're in a couple of different rings here. So we've got the outer ring of 20 static engines. They're going to be providing a huge amount of thrust today to lift off the entire stack. But then we've got the 13 gimbaling engines in the middle, and they're going to be providing the tilt maneuvers and also helping to reorient the booster as it comes back later in today's flight.
Yeah, and when we say gimbal, it's basically tilting or almost wiggling the engines a few degrees and in either direction to allow the booster to steer itself, just as you said, Shiva.
And we'll get some great shots later of actually a wiggle test that we perform ahead of liftoff, just to make sure that all of those engines are able to control their full range of control authority.
One thing to note, those Raptor engines are completely designed and manufactured in-house. They are, as many of you know that have been following along, they are a reusable methane oxygen staged combustion type engine. So it's a lot of words there. And ultimately, that staged combustion means that we combust the propellant in stages that we kind of pre-combust them in a pre-burner, and by doing so, it allows the engine to be more efficient, i.e. more powerful.
Yeah. Now, like Falcon 9, the Super Heavy has 4 grid fins to assist with orienting itself in its return back to Earth. We got a shot of them there beneath the Starship's aft flaps. Now, as we talked about earlier, Super Heavy is not going to be attempting a land landing today, but with this flight test, we're still trying to get as much data as we can. We're focusing on the fundamental systems and operations, so that's the liftoff portion, but we are going to try to get some data on how the fins work for that water landing that Super Heavy is going to be making after ascent.
I love that great view of the fins there. Now, Starship, or the spacecraft, is the 2nd stage, and it makes up the top portion of the vehicle. It's designed for carrying passengers and cargo to Earth orbit and beyond. It stands about 50 meters tall, which is a little taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's comprised of 6 Raptor engines, 3 sea level and 3 vacuum engines, which are optimized to operate in the vacuum of space. And they provide a maximum of 258,000 tons of thrust in vacuum. Spacecraft is also outfitted with 4 flaps to help aerodynamically control the vehicle's attitude, which you can see those 2 forward flaps there on your screen now. So they help control the vehicle's attitude during atmospheric flight and enable precise landing at the intended location. Now, one thing we got to mention, the heat shields. They are iconic. Starship is wrapped in a heat shield, which is composed of 18,000 hexagonal ceramic tiles designed to insulate the vehicle during that atmospheric entry. And that's really important because the temperatures can be as high as 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The hex-shaped tiles, like the ones that Shiva and I have, roughly make up about 2/3 of the vehicle. We can see that we have some different shapes. Mine is slightly curved. As you can imagine, it sits on the curved portions of the Starship vehicle.
Now, the one that I've got is a hexagonal tile that's more flat, and it's really used for the flatter structures on the vehicle. And we need a heat shield because when you're coming back in from reentry, we're going supersonic, we're compressing all the air ahead of us. That ends up causing a lot of heating along the surface, and without a heat shield, that would go straight into the structure.
Yeah, one thing that's amazing to me, especially when I first picked up one of these heat shield tiles, is that they're so light. They almost feel like they're made out of foam. They're that light, and they kind of sound like it too. And one thing that we do want to mention, in order to reject the maximum amount of heat during that entry, like Shiva was just saying, they're black, and that's because black helps reject that heat that is building up on the exterior of the heat shield.
Now, Starship is designed for vertical takeoff and landing as opposed to taking off and landing like an airplane, and that's because that's really important because we don't have runways on the moon or Mars. Fortunately, at those destinations, the gravity is not as high as it is here on Earth. On Mars, the gravity is just 1/3 of what it is here on Earth, and on the moon, it's just a sixth. So in both of those cases, Starship, with just its engines, can take off without needing the super heavy booster like we do need here on planet Earth.
Now, for today's test, Starship does not have its landing legs attached because, like we said before, it won't be returning anywhere. Starship is expected to make a very hard ocean landing, which, if we even make it that far and manage to get any views, it will certainly make for a very exciting end to today's test. At this point in time, we are 20 minutes or just over 20 minutes from liftoff. Let's check in with John Innsbrucker for a status update. Hey, John, how's it looking?
Thanks, Kate. I'm John Innsbrucker, Principal Integration Engineer here at SpaceX. We're currently loading propellant from the ground system into both the first and second stages. Now, both vehicles use the same two propellants. That commonality helps build the reliability. And the fuel today is liquid methane, and that's at a temperature of just over 100 kelvins. That's about minus 272 degrees below zero on the Fahrenheit scale. Now, liquid methane is a different fuel from Falcon 9. That booster uses RP1 kerosene. However, our oxidizer is liquid oxygen, and that's the same as Falcon 9. Because there is no oxygen in space to support combustion, we have to bring our own. Now, leading up to where we are right now, we had a go-no-go poll. That was conducted just after T-minus 2 hours. And once the team gave their goes, we started loading propellants onto the booster at T-minus 1 hour and 39 minutes. At T-minus 1 hour and 22 minutes, we began propellant loading of the ship. The second stage you can see on your screen right there. Now, propellant loading of the Starship's second stage main tanks completed at about the T-minus 27-minute mark, at which time we then began loading the two header tanks in the nose of the second stage. Now, at T-minus 3 minutes, when the first stage super heavy propellant loading completes, that means we'll have all the propellant on the rocket, and the vehicle will be fully loaded with over 10 million pounds of propellant. Now, right now, at T-minus 19 minutes and counting from liftoff, the weather and winds are looking good. We have been watching the ground level winds. They're at 18 miles an hour. As the morning continues, they will increase, but that is below our limits right now. We're also looking at upper altitude winds. We're waiting for one more balloon, but we believe that we're going to be go. On the launch vehicle itself, the teams, the good news, they're not working any issues right now. But if for some reason we do not make our test flight today, if we have to hold, we have a backup launch window. However, we're not sure when it would be. It could be 24 or 48 hours after today. It'll depend on how far we get into the countdown. But right now, heading for a T0 at 8:28 Central, 13:28 Universal Time. Kate, everything is looking good.
Awesome news. Now, in order to make life multiplanetary, we need a fully reusable vehicle that's capable of carrying a huge amount of cargo and a lot of people to orbit and have a pretty quick turnaround. The idea is to effectively reuse launch vehicles just like airplanes.
Yeah, imagine if you had to wait for a new airplane to be constructed every time you wanted to fly. You'd rarely go anywhere, and for most of us, it would be completely unaffordable. In order for us to get to Mars and back with lots of people, lots of cargo, multiple times, reusability really is a must.
In advance of our first missions to Mars, Starship will execute a number of missions with both cargo and people, starting with Earth orbit and eventually expanding to the moon and beyond.
Now, in the near term and a bit closer to home, Starship will also be critical to other programs. Once fully operational, it'll deliver the full-size and upgraded version of our Starlink satellites, and that's super exciting because our next-generation satellites represent a step forward in Starlink's capabilities and will allow us to connect millions of more people around the world with high-speed internet to watch launch webcasts.
Such an exciting future ahead of us, but first, let's talk a little about how we got to where we are today.
Now, Starship's testing ramped up in July of 2019 with our Starhopper prototype, sort of a short version of the Starship that we see today. There's a great photo of it. It was just over 18 meters tall. It had a single Raptor engine, and we had it to test fly and perform low-level altitude maneuvers and attempt landing. The initial test flight, or hop, reached about 20 meters in altitude. That was followed by the one that you've got on your screen here. This was our 150-meter altitude hop. We went up, took a little jaunt away, about 100 meters or so away from the launch pad, used that Raptor engine to fly and actually land. And actually, this hopper is actually down at Starbase now.
Yeah, I love this shot. It's just so fun to see it fly. After a series of 150-meter hop tests with earlier prototypes, the Starship program saw a major breakthrough during a test flight of the vehicle known as serial number 8, or SN8. You can see it there on your screen now. In December 2020, SN8 demonstrated a first-of-its-kind controlled aerodynamic descent and landing flip maneuver. 2 words, belly flop. The SN8 prototype rose to an altitude of 12.5 kilometers or 7.8 miles and conducted a belly flop maneuver, which you see there, during its descent. While it didn't stick the landing, the test was a major milestone in the development of Starship. In fact, we should be able to see that unfortunately failed landing. Boom. It was fun to watch, though.
Rapid unscheduled disassembly, but learned a lot of data. Now, the testing continued on to prototype serial number 9. It took a 10-kilometer flight. That's about 6.2 miles up. In February of 2021, we had a nominal ascent. We executed the engine cutoffs once we got to the top of the altitude window. We did that belly flop maneuver, which is so much more fun to say than controlled descent, aerodynamic maneuver. That was all stable, but unfortunately, we had a dramatic end on this flight as well. We had a failure on one of the engines that resulted in another pretty large fireball. But what was really cool about both of those flights was how much we learned just between serial numbers 8 and 9 and how quickly we were able to achieve our primary objectives in those 2 flights. In addition to that, we got so much data that demonstrated control of the vehicle in that subsonic regime.
Ultimately, we performed 9 Starship high-altitude test flights in total. And then, as you see on your screen there, in May of 2021, SN15 launched from Starbase, reached an altitude of about 10 kilometers, performed a number of maneuvers, and safely returned to the launch site. This was the first Starship prototype to fly, control its descent, safely land, and be recovered in one piece.
And people were cheering like crazy
I was
after
one of
that
them.
test flight. Now, having achieved those successes in our suborbital campaign, one of the next big challenges is for the upper stage when it comes to reusability and surviving the hypersonic, really high heating phase of entry. Combined with the later ability to refill Starship's tank with propellants, the fuel and oxygen, while we're on orbit, that will enable us to have a fully reusable transportation system that's designed to carry both crew and cargo on long-duration missions, interplanetary flights, and will help humanity get to the moon, travel to Mars, and beyond in our solar system.
This is all just basically our path of progress, basically an iteration on each vehicle. And that iterative process is a core part of how we work here at SpaceX. We like to test early and often, publicly as well, in our case.